webinar is now live. I can see friends. Hello, Mary and Michael and Rebecca. Love to see it. Fantastic. Thank you all for joining us on another Tuesday afternoon episode of The Lunchroom. I am Sarah Schofield-Manser. I am the ART's Assistant Director of Special Events and Partnerships. I use she, her pronouns. I am coming to you today from the unceded territory of the Pentucket and Pennacook peoples. I'm a light-skinned white woman with dark hair. It's a little darker than normal because I dyed it by accident. I am sitting in a swivelly chair with some headphones on and wearing a little off-the-shoulder sweater because I got dressed up for all of you today, mostly for Mark, to be perfectly honest. But how are you, Mark?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm just, living life. It's a sunny Tuesday, and I can't complain about that.
Love it. Yeah, it's fun to be back. I haven't been in the lunchroom for a little while.
I know.
So it is nice to be back. Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Lunsford. I'm the artistic producer here at the ART. I take the he, him, his series of pronouns. And I want to acknowledge the land that the Lobe and Oberon, which are the performance venues of ART, the land in which they sit is the traditional ancestral territory of the Massachusetts people. I am a light-skinned white man with a brown beard, close-cropped brown hair. I'm wearing a maroon blazer and a black sweater today. I'm getting hit with some excellent sunlight, so it almost looks like I have a sort of slanted gobo pattern across my across my jacket, which I can't complain about. Yeah, and very, very excited to be back with all of you today. We've got some really exciting lunchroom guests on the way coming up to take us through the holiday season. So keep a lookout for that. We'll be making announcements about those very shortly. And welcome. People are still kind of trickling in.
Yes. Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about next week's guest, since we sort of have confirmed that?
Yeah, of course. So next week, we're very excited to welcome Oompa to the lunchroom. Oompa is a poet and rapper and educator here in Boston. She's worked at Oberon many, many times, and was actually one of the first of our virtually Oberon series this fall. Her show Unbothered is still available on demand on the ART website, so make sure you check that out between now and next Tuesday, when Oompa will join us in the lunchroom to talk about what it is to be making work right now in the live music scene in Boston, and to take us a little bit into the process of making Unbothered and the virtually Oberon series a couple weeks ago. So make sure you join us. That'll be live next week at noon on Tuesday.
I'm so looking forward to that conversation.
Just before your Thanksgiving break, launch into your Thanksgiving break in style.
Have lunch to get ready for Thanksgiving with us on the lunch. Really working the lunch.
You were in high school when the Tuesday before Thanksgiving school lunch was like Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah, maybe.
It was never good. No offense to my high school.
If you want to try, if you're doing something new with your turkey and you want to try your tricks out, prepare for the lunchroom next Tuesday.
We'll be here doing the same, I said tentatively. So fantastic. We're so happy to have you all with us. Just to review format, if you haven't been here before, Mark will lead our special guest into discussion for about 45 minutes, and then we'll turn it over for 15 minutes of Q&A at the end of the hour. If at any point you have a question you'd like to ask, you can submit it using the Q&A feature that you see at the very bottom of your screen. So feel free to toss in a question at any point in the discussion, and Mark and our guests will get to it at the end of the hour. And with that, Mark, I turn over the show to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. We'll see you sooner than you think we will.
I'm going to turn off my camera now.
More to come on that. Without further ado, though, I would really love today's guest. It's very exciting. This person's a very good friend of the ART, a great friend of mine, someone who we've been having routine little check-ins during the pandemic just to see where each other is and what we're working on, and it's been a great lifeline. So, I would love to bring the amazing director and artist Jenny Koons into the lunchroom. Jenny, are you there? Hi.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Oh my God, I love the entrance.
If this was like an NBA situation, I would have figured out how to do like a smoke effect and really.
I love that. I could have run from afar. So I like run into the camera.
Why don't you introduce yourself for our guests?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Koons. I take she, her, hers pronouns. And I'm coming to you from the unceded territories of the Lenape people in Manhattan, New York.
Wonderful, wonderful. Welcome.
Thanks.
So, Jenny, part of what I thought would be really fun for me, and I hope it's fun for everyone watching.
Yeah, love it.
Is just to talk about how we met, because I think often when we meet each other in the industry, producers and artists, whoever else, it can feel very transactional. But
Right.
You and I actually met over some beers at the Boat House in Harvard Square.
Right. After seeing Comet there, which seems like a lifetime ago, truly. But it was so funny because I was thinking the other day in thinking about this conversation that you were one of the humans that for years people had told me you and Mark haven't, but you have all the same interests, but you haven't ever connected. And I remember the first time we met, it was house on fire, blah, 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 till really late. And everyone around was like, this is the first time that you're talking? How is that possible? Which is just the best kind of meeting.
It is. I feel like it was a bit of a spark. And I also feel like whenever we have a wild artistic thought, we have it at the same time, right. Even if we haven't talked in months.
Right.
I distinctly remember somehow us texting about Rhiannon Giddens.
Right.
You're right. She needs to do a musical. You and I were convinced of this fact.
Exactly. Well, and I remember that first conversation that what was so interesting is that we both, sometimes when you meet other artists, producers, creatives, it's immediately about a project. Oh, here's the thing I've been thinking about. But I remember when we first talked, it was all of the biggest questions. It was who is invited in? What is it invited in? What does it mean to participate? How do we make this a place for everyone? It was all of the big things right off the bat, which is the most exciting, I think, the most exciting kind of conversation.
Yeah. Well, Rhiannon is now the artistic director of Silk Road, our neighbors.
I know.
I know.
I know. Well, fingers crossed. The crazy thing about that too is I was going to text you about this because when I saw that she took that job, I have been secretly stalking Silk Road Ensemble for years because of how their mission and values are so much about human connection and storytelling and how you hear that through sound. Uh-huh. And that just has always felt to me put that on stage because the sound tells the story in addition to the people telling the story. And so when I saw that, I thought how serendipitous that all those things came together.
Apropos. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because we're going to talk a little bit about working non-traditionally, whatever that means right. Later. But what first came to be after we kind of had this great interaction socially and really started talking about what we wanted to do artistically together. We came together on this project Burn All Night, which folks remember.
Right. Yay, Burn All Night.
Now Burn All Night. I think there's a lot of Burn All Night family in the house too. I'm just looking at the participants. I think I saw Perry.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So Burn All Night is a synth pop musical about the end of the world.
Right. Obviously.
Makes a lot of sense. Right?
Obviously, Mark.
Can you tell us just a little, give us the elevator pitch about what Burn All Night was?
Yeah, Burn All Night is a synth pop musical about young people who find themselves in this moment of catastrophic change. And at that moment, they're having to ask themselves, what do we do? What do we do when the future seems completely unknown, or the futures that we had thought for ourselves or planned for ourselves might be in question? What exactly do you do in that time? Which feels, given the last 9 months, more relevant than ever. And it's funny, well, not funny, but it's maybe in March or April, Teen Commandments, Nick, and all of us are on a text thread, and Andy and Van and Brett, and someone texted when things were happening in New York that there were like glimmers of things that felt so pulled from the show, in the sense that like when catastrophe hits, it's both monumental and also so ordinary at the same time, that your mind is going from like the biggest questions to like, do I have toilet paper? And the musical is very much about that. How exactly do you grapple with that question?
Yeah. And of course, the book by Andy Yantis, the score by the Teen Commandments, an incredible synth pop band.
Right.
And our friend Sam Pinkleton, who introduced us.
Right.
You want to be the choreographer. I wonder if you could talk a little bit, you told me this funny story about when you first, you had been working with Andy and the guys, and went to Sam about choreographing this. And it was sort of like a fun little like pitch that you did. I can remember.
Right. Well, Sam and I had said for years, we had always had this joke, like, can you imagine how fun it would be to work on something together where like we're addicted to the soundtrack, the songs? Like Sam and I are always obsessing about music and like sending each other music back and forth continuously. And so we'd always said like, oh, I'm just waiting for that show where we're so obsessed with the songs that we like want to listen to them 1,000 times on repeat. And I remember when Van Hughes shared the music for the first time, it felt like, oh, this could be it. And it's one of the genius things about the show. They had always said, Andy and Van and the boys had always said, in the great golden age of musicals, that was pop music. You heard it on the radio, and then you went to see it on Broadway and you recognized those songs. It wasn't like, those are show tunes and this is Ariana Grande. It was all the same. And Andy talks about that a lot in like how we get back to that point where the music feels fun and very much of our lives. So I remember the first time I started listening to the songs, it was like, oh, it's that. It's exactly that. You can't get them out of your head. And then you see it in the club and there's a recognition of what it feels like because you know the song.
Right. And I think that is why it made so much sense in this sort of like Oberon world, right? Because like there is this like overwhelming envelopment of the senses, or that's the intention of Oberon, right?
Right.
And the music felt like really did that.
Right. Well, and it's funny because when we got to the end of the run, I'll never forget it. Like people had seen the show early on and had done whatever they needed to see it a couple of times. And some folks had like voice memoed the songs on their phone. And toward the end of the run, I have this distinct memory of being on the floor for Famous, the song that closes Act 1, and looking around and young people were like singing along. And I remember the Teen Commandments were like, this was always the dream, that as the thing builds, part of the participation of it is that, yeah, you can fucking sing along because it's that kind of vibe. It's not, I'm sitting here saying the words in my head. It really is inviting you to be one of the kids in the show.
Yeah. I think too, it kind of goes back to what you were saying before and how you and I have these conversations where we like to like really sort of like blow up concepts, right?
Right.
Which may never turn into work, but it's just a fun conversation point at the very least for you and I.
Right.
But I think about Brown Night because there's so many big ideas happening, right? It's like bringing this synth pop sound into a music theater context, using that to discuss the end of the world. But then also, I think being in Oberon in particular and how the audience experiences the performance is often still such a sort of big idea. It has to really fit a show in a particular way. It's not like you can just put anything in there, right? Like I think about Prometheus Bound, which Diane directed right at the beginning of Oberon, and how that was so tailored to what that space was. And Brown Night feels that way too. And I wonder if you can talk about sort of the particular approach to directing a piece that has still a lot of music theater rules involved, even though it's trying to break so many other of those rules, and how you come into a space that's not just in the round, but is like actually everywhere. It's in 360 degrees.
Right.
And what that was for you is in terms of an approach and how to think about Oberon.
Right. Well, one of the best and most amazing things about Oberon is that it actually is a club. It's not like we took this downtown theater and made it feel like a club. Like, it is actively a club. There's an active bar, there are active tables. People understand the rules of how that club works. And so one thing very early on was, for me, to see a lot of different performances in that club. Like the cast, we went to a number of shows that were happening in Oberon while we were rehearsing, so we could get a sense of like, how does the room feel? We saw like some burlesque shows there with the table set up on the floor. We saw a donkey show. So it was a way for me to figure out like, okay, how do other things sit in this club? And what are all the secrets of this club? I remember it was one of the things I asked Sarah Brown, the set designer, and I asked Skip, the production manager, on the first day, like, what are your favorite parts about this space that no one knows, or that people sometimes use, but don't always use? Yeah. And right off the bat, he was like, that princess box, that railing, this thing you can stand on. Like, so how do you fit the thing to really showcase the space? But the other thing about Burn All Night, very early in the development process, we were talking about how the songs are used. So there are these scenes of people in kind of ordinary, everyday New York, and then these heightened moments of singing where we would use the language of like, it's like they're in their own music video for a moment. So one thing that was so genius about how the designers worked is, how do we show the contrast between like the very ordinary, and then when does it pop out of screen almost? And the first third of that show, the scenes in the beginning before the main character goes to the club for the first time, were pretty flat. So they looked more like a normal musical. They were flat. Everyone's looking at the stage. The performers are looking out. And the first time Bobby goes to the club, that's the first time it becomes 360.
Yeah.
So like, can you get people to kind of go along for the ride if we all feel the difference between this and then like, oh, the show is everywhere?
Yeah, I think a lot of that relationship too, the audience coming in, I think didn't always understand that they were going to be standing for much of the show.
Right.
And I think I can tell you from the beginning, people were like, oh my God, I'm standing the whole time. Like, there was a lot of angst about that to start.
Right.
But the minute you sort of flip that switch for them in the staging, where we come into the club and then they kind of understood that they were in the club with the characters, you could notice quickly that the buy-in increased hugely from the audience.
Right.
Because the vibe sort of brought them into that in a different way than what they were expecting.
Right. Well, and it was something we talked about in the staging of it. Like, can we get away with the first 22 minutes of it, people saying like, why am I standing if it's going to happen there the whole time? So like, can we set the foundation of what normal feels like in order to blow it out in the whole space? And will people trust us enough? I remember saying like, oh, I feel like people are going to start watching this and think like they staged this so poorly. That's what you're doing in Oberon? And then, at minute 22 or whatever, it shifts. And as you said, you could feel the shift in the audience from like this to, oh, thank God. Okay, good.
Yeah, here we are.
Right.
A couple quick fun casting stories that I feel like we should touch on. The first is, our great casting director, Stephanie Yankwit, who had worked with us from the beginning. I mean, I think one of those first meetings was you and Stephanie and I.
Right.
We were pushing really hard because the show was about college students, right?
Right.
And so we did this like pretty robust college student casting in Boston.
Right.
We had that like a lot of Harvard students in, a lot of Boston Conservatory students in, and a couple ended up on the show and are now on Broadway and doing whatever else,
Right.
but that was, I think there was a lot of intention in the casting to make sure we really like captured the age of these characters appropriately.
Right. And it felt like, you know, one of the things that's always so hard, hard for me, but when you go to see a show and you see people playing young people and you're like, she's actually 35, like there's no way that person.
I'm 35, so that reads me.
Sorry. But like, it just feels different. You have a different energy, as we all did when we were 22, when we were 20. And because this is their story, it felt like, all right, well, how can we be really intentional about who is representing them on stage? And so we did a large casting call at Harvard, which was an amazing experience. And the first time for the creative team, I have a video on my phone of everyone singing Famous at the end of that audition, because it was the first time that we had all heard like a group of 12, 18-year-olds scream that song.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's what it has to feel like. And one of the great things about working at ART for that as well was that we had Harvard students who were part of the process. Thomas, my amazing assistant, Brian, who was Kian, our music director's amazing assistant. Like, we had young people, incredible artists on the team, which just also makes a huge difference for folks to say like, yeah, that is a no, and to be part of that collaboration actively.
Yeah. One of the other fun casting stories, I think, is this is right before MJ started in her television stardom on Pose.
Right.
And I remember we had offered her the show, and then she got offered a Broadway contract, and so she couldn't do the show, but then got offered the television show.
Right.
And so was able to come back to us. And I remember us being elated because we'd all worked with MJ before on so many things.
Right. That timing of how that worked, it's such a testament to how things work in new development, the creation of new pieces. When you have writers who are obsessed and love the performers, this song, Down to You, was very, very much written with MJ in mind. And it's one of a couple of songs that were written once we had already started rehearsal. We were like, okay, we know we need something like this. We know we need something like this. There's an incredible phone video that Van sent me of the first time they heard MJ perform it with the voice like play on the microphone that we were interested in their apartment at Harvard. Like they called her over. They're like, could you just try this? And everyone was like, it's that. And so that kind of collaboration was just such a gift, and how to craft something around an incredible performer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I had forgotten that song was written during the 3 or 4 weeks of rehearsal. That's incredible. And I'm thinking a lot about, we're working on this series virtually over on. We've done these like really intense safety protocols to film these shows in Oberon where we've had to like really restrict to the stage, and artists are doing incredible things in that space. But it's also like heartwarming to revisit these moments where you have just like used that space to its max in so many ways. It's really exciting.
Well, and there's a certain energy that is so palpable when you're in close quarters. Like, there's a reason why clubs are designed to be small. And one of the genius things that Sarah Brown, the set designer, did is she installed a grid to lower the ceiling. So it felt even actually much more enclosed than Oberon can sometimes feel with the ceiling height, so that it felt like you were part of this secret thing that was happening, but also that energy you feel when you're going, excuse me, like that is part of the fun of it. And there were so many moments that Sam beautifully used, like all of the performers going through the house quickly, or how do we use that to kind of frame the tempo of what it feels like to be in the crowd.
I remember several rehearsals, Emma and I being there, and some of the bar staff being there during rehearsal time, and you being like, okay, everyone needs to come out here, and I need you all just to stand really tightly together right here so that the performers can get a sense of what they're going to have to work through.
Right. How long does it actually take for you to run back there, change your shirt, and get back if it's a packed dance floor and everyone's like in it, not paying attention to where you're walking?
Yeah. That was a particularly exciting rehearsal process. I mean, a lot of this with Brown Night brings up, Jenny, for me, and one of the things I've been excited about in your work so much is that I feel like you are always questioning what the audience's relationship is going to be to the performance, right? And I read it a couple of times, and like strangely, Diane Paulus has said this in a lot of spaces, but it like hit me once during the pandemic, it was like a board orientation, where Diane was describing the space between the performers and the audience as where theater happens. It's this sort of like sacred space, which has, I don't know how I hadn't actually heard her say that before when she had said it in front of me so many times, but that has like really impacted me a lot, and especially in thinking about our relationship to work right now. So I just wonder if you can talk a little bit about like how you think about the audience when you're approaching a piece, and kind of where they come into the calculus for you when you're conceiving a new play.
Some real like garbage truck action happening out there.
I was really trying to power through. I'm glad you just named it.
I know. I was trying to decide, like, should I just say like there's a truck outside, or should I just pretend it's not happening?
Yeah, I'll tell you what.
No. I mean, I love what she named about the space between. And I guess for me, when I think about like participation and the thing that we all make when we all come together, the example you just shared of like, we're rehearsing in a room, we actually need bodies to come into the space to pretend to be the bodies. Like, that's such a great example, because when you're performing it to a completely open, empty room, it just isn't the same. And that's not for everything. Like, there's certainly things that we work on where like, it's okay that we're rehearsing. They're not so integral to the actual way that the thing will happen. But I guess I find myself really obsessed with that thing that happens when everyone is together, and kind of more and more like obsessed by the risk of what is the thing that actually can only happen when all of us are together. And that unpredictability, I think, is really fun. And it's the thing for me that differentiates it from watching Netflix, honestly. As someone who like loves watching episodic television, that's a different lunchroom series. But the thing that doesn't have is the risk, right? That like, oh, if someone is just screaming along to Lincoln singing that last verse, that he can have a reaction like, we're all here, and then keep going. Or it was one of the things that all the performers got really good at. How do you take in actual humans in the room and stay on track with what the show that you're performing that night? And it's something that Sam and I talked about a lot. Like, where are the moments where they are going to be dancing with people? Where does that feel contrived? And it is about just following the pace of the show. But I love the risk of, we actually don't know until there's 100 more people here.
I love talking about that in terms of risk. And I wonder, what in your mind is sort of the artist's responsibility to the audience after the event of the play?
I mean, that's the question, right? If I'm inviting you into an event, or inviting or asking you to step out of your normal behavior, or to like loosen your inhibitions for that night and like just dance or just burn all night, was one of the arguments of the show, right? If you know it's going to end, will you just burn bright until it's over? And if I'm asking you to take yourself into that space, then how do I care for you with that? Mm-hmm. So is it about making sure that then you have a 20-minute dance party after to like release all of that before you go? Is it about a formal curtain call and saying like, that was the play part, And this is now the afterplay part, which curtain calls for me, I've always resisted. I just like, I don't love that as a form. And I remember a producer saying to me, like, it's not for you. It actually is fully for them. You have to help people understand that, like, that is the thing you got them to. And now another chapter opens. It's irresponsible not to do that. So how do you mark that in some way? Which I think is, just about how we care about audience from beginning to end.
I'm just having this memory of when we did the meet and greet with the ART staff and the full cast, you asked us this question.
Yeah. The question was, if the world were ending tomorrow, where would you want to be?
Yeah. And I feel like that, just like you've said it, that gets so much to the core of what this show was like not so much about how the world is ending or what is causing the world to end, but where do you want to be when that moment comes? It kind of, takes me into this other project that you've been working on. If we can leave Burn All Night for a moment, because, we reconnected recently over this project you've been working on called Now Becomes Then, which I think is a project you've been working on in iterations over many years, but now you're in a very specific chapter with COVID. And so I'd love for you just to talk a little bit about what that project is, because I think there's a lot in there sort of relating to our conversation right now in terms of how an audience experiences a performance and what that relationship means.
Right. So Now Becomes Then is a piece that I've been working on with Actors Theater of Louisville, and it's kind of based on an original commission called Deck of Cards at Denver Center. But it's essentially like an interactive game, or like a narrative game, where there's a guide, a performer who leads the audience member through a series of prompts. They can be storytelling questions. They could be little adventures that they take. They could be monologues that the guide shares. And so this adaptation that at Actors Theater that we've been doing is specifically for an intergenerational dialogue between young people who are their apprentices at Actors. It's a group of 20 young people, roughly, let's say 19 to 25 years old. And we made the decision early on for the audience to be specifically looking at older adults or our elders in the community over 65. Folks that we thought in this extended period, although in May we didn't know how extended it would be, who might be isolated in this time. And it takes place on Zoom. So I think what's compelling about it to me is how we continue to create spaces for strangers to meet in this moment where actually, like, our Zoom restriction really limits our social circles. We don't have the serendipitous meeting with the friend from high school at the coffee shop, for better or for worse. We don't have the bodega guy that we check in with and the cat every time we come home from work. Like, so many of those relationships are on hold. And so thinking about, like, what kinds of new spaces can theater makers, storytellers open up for us in this time? And that they might not look like traditional plays on Zoom. They can, but is there another way that we can also envision what storytelling looks like? And could it be a personal story?
And I wonder, it's a project that, like, absolutely thrills and intrigues me, right? In terms of the responsibility we have right now as storytellers and cultural stewards, and how that happens when we can't gather, right? But I wonder, what does collaboration look like? What does a creative team look like on a project like this? That I would say, much to its benefit and its excitement, might not be theater, right?
Right.
What is the nature of that collaboration, and how do you as artists come together around a piece like this?
Right. I mean, one thing that was integral to that collaboration, in the same way that we were saying before, like, Burn All Night is about 20-year-olds, so you better make sure you have 20-year-olds in the room. Same thing for this. So once we knew, oh, this is a conversation between young adults and older adults, the question was, how do we find older adults to be part of a rehearsal process from day one? So it's not like we're making this thing, older people are going to love this, and then we present it to them. No, it's like, how are we creating this thing with all of the people who will be involved in its entire life? And how does that start from day one? So we had 3 Actors Theater longtime volunteers who were part of our rehearsal process in the first beta stage. They were like, we're not actors. And we were like, no, but you have opinions, you're generative, you're helping us kind of receive feedback on what is and isn't working and giving so many ideas for what you need in this moment. So we're all coming together and saying, what do we need? And how do we make something that contains that? Which in a way feels very similar to putting on any play. Like, we have this thing we're all going to create together that as of yet is not made at all. It's invisible still. And all of us collectively are going to contribute what we can to make it something beyond what an individual could have done. Which very much is the story to me. When I watched that video about Burn All Night, I'm like, oh, we could not have done that without every single individual in that room saying, could it be this? Could it be this? Could it be this? And so it's exactly the same process, actually, even when the thing might look different from like a traditional musical.
Because it really sounds like, I mean, all of what you just said really brings me to this point where you are saying, you know, in the theater, we're often saying like, this is a story that needs to be told, and we're going to decide how it is told to the audience. And you're kind of saying, I don't know what the story is, but I want to create conditions to have stories emerge from people.
Right. And we might have an idea of what the arc of it is going to be. Like, I know my intention that by the time the younger adult and older adult finish their time together, there's a sense of being seen, or the power of one's own story and kind of the agency in owning one's story. I know what I want the feel to be, and the details of how we get there. Some of those things I'm going to come into the room with a starting point, and some of it we'll find together, which is exactly the same as working on a new musical, honestly. Mm-hmm. We've got some songs, we've got the script, we've got 30 people who have never met each other before. And some of this is going to work. And in some cases, we're going to have to write a new song for that because we're missing something. It's the same kind of process, even if the content is different.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think often as theater makers or storytellers right now, we think about our power being stunted because of the pandemic. But you're really suggesting that it's like unleashing a different part of our power, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, without sound, I feel very hopeful about the ways in which it is giving access to so many humans who have not been able to participate, like 1,000 times over. And one of the great things about the experience of Now Becomes Then is so many older adults were like, I've never been part of something like this. I live in an assisted living facility. I can't leave my house to go see the matinee of Christmas Carol. So in this way, I can participate, and you're meeting me where I am, which is like incredible. And at the same time, I can't wait for us all to be back together. I hope that we pull those lessons into the continuation of what it looks like in both forms to be working, because the loss, watching that video, the loss is significant that we're all not crammed in there, experiencing that in real time together.
Yeah. I do want to get to some questions because we've got some great questions coming here from the audience. So I'm just going to jump in kind of right away. And this is a little bit what we've been talking about, but how do you nurture the performer audience relationship in the current virtual digital space?
I think one piece is thinking about the whole experience that you want the audience and the performer to have from beginning to end, and how you structure that. So much of those givens of like, for a performer, I get my backpack ready, I go to a rehearsal space, I rehearse in that space, then I go home. Like all those structures are gone right now. And same for audience members. So one thing I think to nurture that is to help everyone understand what the rules are. It's about being clear of like, this is what you'll need. Here's how I'll support you if you've never been on Zoom before. Here, if you haven't joined us, this is what it looks like, kind of how you and Sarah did it at the top of this session, so that everyone feels like, regardless of what level of experience they have, they're invited into it in a way that feels comfortable. And for performers, I feel like part of that is, for me, how do I establish some of the same rituals that we would have if we were together? Like a warm-up, a physical warm-up in the tiny corner of your bedroom, or like a discussion question like the one you said at meet and greet. How do I keep some of the feel of community even when we're not in a room? And that kind of comfort, I think, gives you an openness to then interact live with someone on a screen.
Well, this is a kind of a non sequitur, but it just sort of brought forth for me in your answer to that question is, what is your experience in terms of working with artists who are maybe not traditionally theater artists, or maybe not traditionally affiliated with performance, and sort of bringing them into that process where there may be a lot of learning to do about how something written is translated into a performance and is translated into an actor's body? Because I feel like you have experienced this a lot. You're one of the exciting directors in my mind I like to work with, who thinks like, I don't care if they're a theater composer, or I don't care if they're a theater writer, right? Like, I want to work with artists, I want to work with storytellers in this way. So I wonder like what your experience is in that kind of world.
I mean, I think it's the best, honestly, which is why I think I crave that so much, because it continuously shakes things up. I think that there can be a pattern sometimes when I'm working with folks who like all know the way it goes. I know the calendar, I know this thing, I know how this goes. There's a comfort that can be great sometimes. And I feel like adding one new spice into that mix can make everyone kind of rethink their assumptions, whether you know them or not, about like how this is supposed to go. And I think to the first question about how do you nurture that so that it feels comfortable enough for everyone to like bring their best into it, part of that's just about clarity. I think one of the biggest things is just that the vocabulary that theater uses is really specific. So like they do the same thing in music, they just call it something different. Or they do the same thing in whatever. So how do you learn to translate it so that folks feel like their expertise is being acknowledged and not like thrown away? Like, oh, you do that? Well, we do this. No, it's the same. And also like we could learn a lot from the way that you do that.
Right.
And how to build in the time so that you're talking about it as the process goes, and you're not just like, oh, we'll figure it out.
I have to ask, our dear friend AJ Raphael is in the Q&A.
I wish we could have AJ pop into video, like you know what I mean, like a guest star. Yeah,
I know, that would be great. AJ. So AJ asks, can you talk about Asian American representation in theater and your experience being an Asian American woman in this industry?
Ooh, the question. Yes, AJ. I mean, I think we are in a moment of questioning in a lot of fields, and our field is one of them, about whose stories are lifted up and whose are not, whose are spotlit and whose are not, never make it to that stage. One thing that someone had asked me a while ago, like, is your identity important in how you describe yourself as a director? And I feel like any work that I make is Asian American work. And that can look like the Blue Man Group, or that can look like Burn All Nights, or that can look like this weird thing that's hard to explain called Now Becomes Then. And that feels really exciting to me, that we can start to imagine all of the possibilities of what it means to be an Asian American artist. And I think in terms of representation, then I think, how do I make sure and hold myself accountable for making sure that the things that I make reflect the world that I live in authentically? And how do I continue to be really rigorous about what that means? And part of it is surrounding yourself with producers like you or artists like AJ who are also part of that questioning. So we all can phone a friend and be like, hey, I'm doing this thing. Does this rub you the wrong way? Like, is this right? Or could I be more challenging in how I'm thinking of this? And that feels really exciting to me because more and more of us are very aware and wanting to dig in even deeper than we have been in the past. Or I feel that way for sure.
Well, and I feel like so much of your work in the industry, as it were, is also about organizing.
Right.
And it often begs the question for me, where we're drawing the lines between when you're creating art and when you're organizing for change in the industry. And are those things different? Are they different to you?
I mean, I said a while back that I think I would love to re-envision the title of directing instead as community organizer. Because I actually think they're very similar. It's about moving a group of strangers towards something that doesn't exist yet, that is yet to exist. And that can be a play, or that can be healthcare for all, universal healthcare or universal basic income. Like, it's how do we bring people together in order to move towards something we don't know? And in that sense, I feel more and more like, oh, it's all the same skills. Like, so many artists were involved in work for this election this year and are on ongoing work for Georgia now in January. And it feels like, yeah, it's the same skill set, y'all. I mean, obviously we know that. And
Right.
I crave language that saw more connection between the two, because it feels so intertwined.
Yeah. All right, I want to get to some more questions from our audience. You mentioned staging discoveries about the space you made when designing and rehearsing. Were there any discoveries you made about the show that were informed by your work in the space? For Burn All Night, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of anything really specific about the space. I mean, there were definitely things. One thing that was so exciting about rehearsing, like right next to the space, like literally down the hall from Oberon, is that we could try something and then go into the space and see like, oh, that's what it would look like. So in a way, some of those last minute discoveries we kind of were making as we rehearsed. But I feel like there were some things once we got it into previews and we started to have an audience where it felt like, okay, they need more time to do that, or it's actually not clear what the story is when they do that. So how do you help support that through design? Or is this a writing issue? How do I support especially the story that's being told? Because in a way, like the 360 storytelling, it can be really disorienting for an audience. And so what's the clearest that you can do that? And it's such a testament to Jess, our sound designer, and Bradley, our lighting designer, for like how they really shaped, like when someone's singing there, you hear it there and it lights up there and it's guiding me through where to look without overdoing it in a way.
Yeah. Perry's in the chat saying, one discovery, the bar gets slippery.
That was a really big discovery.
Yeah.
There were also straps on the bar that Perry and MJ used to try to like grip, because it was, that was a real issue. And I feel like the storytelling about this is that Burn All Night broke some Oberon bar records. So it was a very active space during this show as well.
It was a very active space. I was not on the bar stuff anymore at that point because I was doing the producing work. But I remember the first couple of nights I was like, I'm going to get behind the bar because there's going to be so much to negotiate. I'm just going to try to help as much as I can.
Right.
And to watch MJ literally hang on to one of those straps and have just her heel basically holding on the bar. And she's like, no, I'm fine. Terrifying.
MJ did it, and then Perry did it in that Burn All Night second reprise where like totally leaning over. Oh,
I mean, the good news is the show was sold out every night. So if they would have fallen, it would have just been crowd surfing.
That's right. Don't tempt us. That would have just been worked into the show from then.
So true. We only have a few minutes left, Jenny. And one of the other things I just wanted to talk to you about is the work that's happening right now that's really exciting to you, or what you're seeing from other artists that's really sort of inspiring you, or even it doesn't have to be about inspiring your own work, that's just entertaining you or that's just exciting you to be in the audience for, and what in that work you sort of see lasting beyond this moment of the pandemic. Like, what are we learning about how we make the work that's going to stay with us?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think now that we have expanded into this form, I don't see us going back to just that. I feel like we've opened this up in a way that feels beautiful and engaging, and we're all trying and experimenting a lot with exactly what this means. And that feels inherently exciting to me. Like, what does it mean to, if we were to do Burn All Night again, what does it mean to have that show as the onstage portion? And then what is this portion?
Yeah.
Right. So like, how do you do both? And how does that enhance someone's experience of the thing you're making? How does it enhance the storytelling? I think some of the most exciting stuff that I'm seeing now is where theater is really embracing the idea of film and like how these cameras move, how we use green screen and other effects to like overlay, and what are the layers of how storytelling can work. So one thing that was really fun about Burn All Night was experimenting with like the story of the foreground and then the story of the background. Because you're an Oberon, you can have multiple stories happening at once. And I feel like that's a place where now I'm starting to see theater makers experiment with that online. I saw a great production of the Scottish play that was through a tiny company in England, and they did some incredible green screen work with like multiple people in all these different places. And the audience members would see themselves at McBee's table, or like just really genius experimentation with visuals.
Yeah, I think that's very exciting. I mean, that's a little bit what I was getting to. The work we've been doing at Virtually Oberon, there was a lot of nervousness at first at having to restrict people to the stage to kind of keep safety protocols right in the space. So it was sort of a necessity. But then what each artist has taken that to mean, it's like, I'm still with the 360 experience, even if you're keeping me on stage.
Right.
Has been pretty awesome.
Right. That feels thrilling to me. Mm-hmm. And like also a long time coming in terms of thinking about how we get better at enriching our options for folks who can't make it to the theater, whether they're 85 or whether they're 15. How do we get better?
Yeah. I mean, there's been this leaning into the exclusivity of the event in the theater for so long that I feel like now we're learning how that has kept us from sharing the work wider.
Right. Well, and what does participation look like? So one of my favorite things about seeing theater right now on Zoom is the chat. I love that. It's like watching the debate and being on Twitter, right? It's like that you have this thing happening and you're part of a conversation about it as it's happening. That feels really fun to me. So what are ways that we start to expand what participation looks like? It could look like dancing on the floor next to Perry. It also could look like many, many other things.
Yeah. this has just been the most fun.
So nice. I love it.
We're already at time, which always creeps up on me. I always have like the jitters about these lunchrooms, and then all of a sudden an hour goes by, and it's just been so fun, and you kind of feel like you blacked out.
I can't believe it's one.
I know.
Oh no! Let's watch another clip and talk more about it.
I always say that there should be like an act 2 that's like libation room where you can and talk about the work even more.
I like that.
Yeah. Jenny, thank you so much for being here. It is so good to reconnect with you.
Thanks.
And for our audiences to get to reconnect with you.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
The thing I didn't bring up was that Burn Light was almost 3 years ago. 4.
3.
3.
I think it was 3.
I think you're right.
Which also feels impossible.
Yes. Well, thank you everyone for watching. It's been so exciting to be back with you. Please join us next week in our conversation with Oompa about her show Unbothered. Again, if you have not checked it out, it's on demand on the ART website. Please go check it out. It is a total revelation in Oprah. So I hope you give that a look. Thanks again, Jenny. Thanks everyone.
Thanks. Bye everyone. Thanks for being here.